We are having a launch party to celebrate a new app, Thunderbird Wellness, and a new monthly podcast, Mino Bimaadiziwin. To tell us more about that podcast, let's head now to the unceded lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Territory and the city of Ottawa, where we find David MacGuffin. We first met David when Carol was invited to participate in a podcast that David was helping produce with the former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. David is a journalist who's worked with the CBC and NPR around the world. Today, he's happy making podcasts for organizations such as the Canadian Geographic, the Canadian War Museum, and now Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. Welcome, David.
Podcast, Mino Bimaadiziwin, from its very early conversations we had about bringing it together, you could see the real possibility and the potential in it. I always say the best podcasts out there are niche podcasts that focus in on a topic and a subject. And Mino Bimaadiziwin has certainly hit that on all the marks. The other key thing too is to have people passionate about the subject that's being discussed in the podcast. And again, with Carol, with Sherry as the host, with Kathy, with the team I've worked with at Thunderbird, clearly that passion is there. So I see a great future for the podcast going forward. It's the great thing about podcasts is it's just this ability to reach people. I mean, I always tell people that when you're in a podcast, you're literally getting into people's heads. They're all wearing headphones of some kind or another for the most part. And what a privilege that is. So you have a great access to an audience out there. And you also have access to an audience that is very hard to reach in other places. Podcasts are where, for the most part, you can find millennials and Generation Z, those difficult to reach younger audiences that are key for this topic, especially, I think, as well. So this is a great possibility to reach into those audiences as well. We just recorded our second episode today. We'll hear a clip of our first episode with Carol, I think just after I'm finished talking to you. But we spoke today to Alika Lafontaine. Dr. Alika Lafontaine is the first Indigenous president of the Canadian Medical Association. So in a hugely symbolic role, but he really talked about too the systemic changes he's trying to make to end systemic racism within our healthcare system. And it's that kind of sort of heavyweight, thoughtful, smart conversations that we're going to be bringing to you on a monthly basis over the next year and beyond. And I just want to add to what a gift it is to be working with Sherry Huff as the host of this podcast. Sherry and I are old CBC colleagues, and she just brings that professionalism, again, that thoughtfulness, smart questions, smart follow-up. She listens to her guests. It makes the conversations a great listen for everyone involved. If you want to help us with this podcast, everyone out there listening, I would encourage and ask that you go find it. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google, it's wherever you listen to podcasts out there. Go there and give us a 5-star rating and give us a glowing review. We are all sort of tied into the algorithm, and as much as I don't love being tied into a robot, what the algorithm loves is positive reviews and positive and 5-star ratings, and really 5-star ratings are what we need to. And that just gives us a bigger audience. They'll promote us. We'll get promoted on platforms better. So, I mean, as you're listening to this, if you have a moment on your phone or on your laptop, just click in and find Mino Bimaadiziwin and do give us that review. It will help us as we launch going into the seasons ahead. Also, don't forget to subscribe when you're on those apps as well, because that means it'll drop the podcast. The podcast will let you know that it's got a new episode out, which will be every month, as I mentioned. I think we have a clip here now that we can play for you of our very first episode with Sherry and Carol, just talking about the opioid and methamphetamine crisis within First Nations communities. It's again a very smart, thoughtful conversation, and I hope this snippet of it gives you an idea of what you're in for in the season ahead. Can we play that?
We're in the midst of a substance use related public health crisis. It's been described as the gravest substance use related public health crisis in modern history.
That's Dr. Carol Hopkins, Chief Executive Officer of the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. She's our guest on this first episode of Mino Bimaadiziwin. Mino Bimaadiziwin means living the good life in the language of the Anishinaabe. This podcast aims to seek and share insight about addictions and mental health issues that many of our families and communities are dealing with. We're going to be fearless and have thoughtful and informative conversations with some of the leading voices in Indigenous wellness. What's the current situation with opioids and methamphetamines in communities in Canada?
Describing the situation in rural and remote First Nations communities. We're in the midst of a substance use related public health crisis, and that's because the rates of death and harms to individuals who use drugs, to families and communities, are significant, and the pandemic has only worsened the situation that we're seeing.
So there's a real difference in how communities that are making strides are approaching this whole issue. It's not just individually focused, it's like a whole community approach.
Yeah, it is a whole of community approach, and it's a whole of a community approach that brings conventional therapy like medication, counseling, alongside and aligns it with our own knowledge and cultural practice, supporting community in using our cultural practice through land-based services, advice of elders and cultural practitioners, supporting people who use drugs in accessing our traditional medicines, our ceremonies, and living off the land.
Well, that just gives you an idea of what we have to come for you. And please definitely do go listen to that episode. And we should have the Alika Lafontaine episode up in a couple more weeks' time, mid-December. And then they'll drop every month after that. So subscribe where you listen to podcasts. And as I say, please give us a rating and please listen. I think it'll be worth your time. So thanks so much. And again, it's been a real honor and a privilege working with Thunderbird Partnership Foundation on this project. I've really enjoyed a lot, and I've learned a lot as well.